With the Elastic Block Store, you attach volumes to your Amazon EC2 instances. So those are actually over a network and they appear locally as local drives to your computer. So as far as your computer knows, these could be a physical hard drive actually inside the computer. But as we know, the EC2 instance is virtualized, and in fact, the volume is accessed over a network as well. So these drives can be mapped to a drive letter such as C and D. The volumes actually exist within an availability zone and they get automatically replicated within the AZ, so there is some resiliency for your data. Now there's a few different types of drive and they basically fall under two main categories. You've got your solid state drives and then your hard disk drives. So on the left hand side here we've got the EBS provisioned IOPS SSD and the general purpose SSD. Now the SSD is obviously higher performance. The general purpose SSD is the default boot volume for your EC2 instance. And provisioned IOPS is a more expensive option where you can actually have much more IOPS. IOPS stands for input output operations per second, so it's the amount of operations your volume can handle. So the more, the better the performance in terms of the amount of operations. There's another measurement here called throughput, so that's the quantity of data that can be throughput. So those two measurements will be useful when you understand the characteristics of your application so you can determine which volume type to use. So the hard disk drives have generally lower performance, they have good throughput but much lower IOPS. And there's a couple of examples of the types of use cases where you might want to use those. Of course, they are lower cost, so if you can get away with using them, you can certainly save some money. So let's go over to the console now and have a look at EBS. So we find EBS actually within the Amazon EC2 console. So if you go to Services, Compute, EC2, that's where you'll find EBS. And here you can see there's a section for Elastic Block Store. And if we go to Volumes, and we don't actually have any volumes. So what we could do is create a volume. And then you get the option to choose the type of volume that you want. So let's go and choose a provisioned IOPS volume, for example. And as you can see, it comes up with a default size. I'll just reduce that down to 10. And it changes the amount of IOPS because the amount of IOPS you can have is up to 50 IOPS per gigabyte. So I'm not able to go over 500 in this case. You can then choose the availability zone in which you want to create your EBS volume. And you can choose to encrypt the volume as well. So I'm just going to leave those options and click on Create Volume. And that doesn't take long. And now let's go back and now we can see we have a volume available. So what I'm going to do is launch an instance and show you how to attach the volume to the instance. So let's go up to Instances. I'm going to choose Launch. And what I'm going to do is come down and I'm going to choose a Windows server. I'm going to choose the free tier eligible T2 Micro. Click on Next. What I want to do here is I do want to make sure it goes into the same availability zone as my EBS volumes. So remember, they're created within an availability zone. So I'm going to stick with that one. Click on Configure Security Group. Go to Web Access. Now I am configuring a Windows server here, so I'm going to need to add port 3389 for the remote desktop protocol to my security group. So let's review and launch, and it actually warns me. So let's continue. I'm going to acknowledge that I have the private key for my key pair, launch the instance, and then let's go to security groups. And for web access, I'm going to create an inbound rule. And this time I'm going to allow RDP. So it finds the protocol for me. It knows that the port is 3389. And then I'm just going to put in the address range for all source addresses. Click on Save Rules. And now I have a rule so I can connect to my instance. So let's go back, and what we're going to do is just wait a minute or two for this to initialize, and then we're going to connect to our instance. It's been a couple of minutes now. I'm going to click on Connect, and let's see if we can get this password. So I need to find my key pair file. So here's my file. Let's click on that and decrypt the password. So now I have the password, and I can use this to connect using my remote desktop client. So I'm going to copy this DNS name to my clipboard, and on my remote desktop client I'm going to add a PC, put that name in, double click, type in the administrator username. And now I'm going to copy the password to my clipboard, paste that in, and let's click on continue. I'm logged on to my Windows desktop now. And what I'm going to do is in the search menu here, I'm just going to type disk management. And then just click on this option that comes up. And that shows me the drives on my computer. So as we can see, we only have one drive, so that's our C drive. There's nothing else there. So what we're going to do now is attach our volume to this EC2 instance. I'm back in the EC2 management console, and what I'm going to do is go down to volumes, and we can see we have two volumes now. So this one here is the C drive, so the root volume on our Windows instance. And then this one underneath, the 10 gigabyte volume that we created, is just sitting here as available because it's not assigned to anything yet. So what I'm going to do is I just right clicked and I'm going to choose attach volume, and we can now search for the instance, and there's only one there, so that's pretty obvious. And let's then just click on attach. That volume is now in use and attached to our EC2 instance. Back in the console now, I didn't need to do anything. We can now see that Windows automatically found that volume. So we now have this 10 gigabytes unused space. And we could quite easily just go and create a volume here. So we just right click and choose initialize and click on OK. And now we can create a simple volume. Just going to click on next and accept all the defaults here. And click on finish. So we can easily open this volume now, and we can see that it's a local drive. It's the D volume on this computer. And if we wanted to, we could then obviously create some data on here. So for instance, let's just put a file called test-file, and now we've got some data on that volume. Back in EC2, I'm now actually going to detach this volume. So let's click on detach, and we can see that's been detached because it shows as available. And back on our EC2 instance, we can see it's gone now. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually attach this volume to a different EC2 instance in a different availability zone. So how can I go about doing that? Well, what we can do is we can create something called a snapshot. And from that snapshot, we can then copy it across to a different availability zone and create a volume from it there and attach it to another instance. And so we'll learn about snapshots in the next lesson, and I'll show you how to do that. Now we can terminate this instance because we're not going to use this instance anymore. So let's just terminate the instance. So we're going to leave this lesson here. I've terminated that instance, but we've still got our EBS volume, which we're going to attach to another instance in another lesson. And before we do that, in the next lesson, I'm just going to teach you about instance